Ladies and gentlemen, I would now like to welcome Dr. Kristin Alford, Managing Director of Bridge 8, to present the findings of her study.
Thanks very much, Greg, and welcome everybody. Thank you for your attendance today. I'll start off by saying Bridge 8 is a foresight and science communications consultancy. I'm an engineer and a futurist, and I work with technologists and communicators. And we're engaged on this project because of our expertise in developing industry strategies, and especially around strategies for the development of the nanotechnology sector in Victoria. So that's why we were engaged on this project. The project really came to two key questions, and the first one was, can we map advanced manufacturing research and development capability in South Australia? And we wanted particularly to know if we could find a common language that would help us map that successfully. And the second key question was, can we determine a preferred mode of engagement between industry and research institutions? So the project really, it started over a year ago, and we spent quite a lot of time developing frameworks to consider these two questions. So how could we think about capability? How could we think about engagement? And I also acknowledge that a year ago our focus was very much on innovation and not on survival. And so our responses may have changed if we had done this more recently. But I think the push for innovation is still an important consideration. And I think the findings that have come out of today are still relevant, even though things may have changed in the short term. The answer is yes, we can, and I think that's an important thing to start off with, because when I first did interviews, and I interviewed about 15 people from research and industry at the start of this project, a lot of people said, you're planning to map advanced manufacturing capability. Can you actually do that? How will you define advanced manufacturing? Is that possible? And we have been able to do that. And I'd also like to acknowledge what Greg said earlier, is that the cooperation between the Science and Innovation Directorate and the Centre for Innovation has certainly made this project much more valuable than it might have been in two separate areas. We've done it in a three-stage process. The first one, as I said, was developing frameworks and finding a definition. The second one was conducting an industry survey, and then we conducted a survey of the research institutions. So our definition is here. And I think the important thing is that we've gained this definition from a literature review and from those interviews with various stakeholders. And when I spoke with the Engineering Employers Association and with Grant Tinney from Precision Engineering, we also looked very closely at what had been the definition in the Advanced Manufacturing Action Plan, but decided that we would prefer to go with a much broader definition to capture as much of what might be considered advanced manufacturing as possible in this first stage. So we've deliberately chosen a very broad definition that incorporates business, processes, innovation, design, and it's about value-added processes and products. The first thing we did was look at capability, and could we map capability? And when I started to talk to people about what was advanced manufacturing, it became clear that there were two separate languages that were used in industry and in research. So in industry, often people would talk about markets where their products would go, or at least the applications. And then when you look behind those applications, there was a set of manufacturing capabilities that were required to produce those products. And behind that, there was a set of required skills and know-how to make those processes work. When you talk with universities, they would often talk about their scientific disciplines or their strategic research capabilities first. So that's what would come out first. And when you actually dug into what those strategic research capabilities were, whether those were things like biochemistry or biomedical engineering, when you dug into that, suddenly we were able to find a common shared language which was about manufacturing capabilities. So when you undertake biomedical engineering, what is it you do? And that's the manufacturing capability level. So by using this model, we were able to find a common language in which we could match up what the manufacturing capabilities were in industry and what their needs were, and what skills in manufacturing capabilities researchers had to meet those needs. We developed 24 categories, a list of 24 different categories of manufacturing capabilities, and we put those to both industry and research to say, do you have these capabilities? The second area was around engagement, and it became clear as we talked to people that engagement would occur in different ways depending on the type of industry or research activity that was involved. And this diagram came out of a conversation with Professor Andrew Parford at the University of South Australia, where we really sort of thought about the types of industry needs and what research could provide. And there really seemed to be 4 areas. So first of all, there was an area which might be manufacturing, and we queried whether there was organisations within this category that would be advanced manufacturing, or whether they would tend to be more traditional manufacturing areas. Then there'll be a set of manufacturing operations that, with a little bit of tools and techniques, could transform into advanced manufacturing operations. Then we suggested that there were another group of companies which we would probably genuinely classify as advanced manufacturing operations. And then there's the potential new business that might arise from research. And the universities may have something to offer at each of those categories. That's what we set out to discover. And the type of engagement that occurs across those categories may be different depending on their needs. So that was our framework: capabilities and engagement. I now want to go to the industry survey results. This was conducted in June 2008, and as Greg mentioned, it was built on previous work undertaken by the Centre for Innovation. They invited industry to participate. We received responses from 40 companies, which was a response rate of 29%, which was very similar to their previous study, and that sort of certainly met our expectations in what we were hoping to achieve. A typical company, you can see where they've come from according to that map. So we were satisfied that we'd gotten a good balance of companies from both the north and south of Adelaide, and we also received 3 responses from regional South Australia. A typical company, you can see that that's what the sort of companies that we were working with in this study. So we certainly weren't getting very, very large companies or responding to this particular piece of work. When we asked them, do you invest in research and development, 78% of companies said yes, they did invest in R&D, and of those, overwhelmingly the R&D was done in-house. So it wasn't outsourced, it wasn't done solely through another agency. Most companies would do some R&D in-house. And when we asked industry, how do you keep up with the latest advances, it was through industry connections. So it was through industry associations, it was through trade journals, or it was talking with colleagues. We found that just over half of companies were not currently engaging with universities, and we asked them, why aren't you currently engaging with universities? And the reasons for not engaging were that it was too expensive, they hadn't thought about it, don't need to, don't know how. When we look at the top ones, I guess the fact that it was too expensive is no surprise. We often hear that. But we also think that there are ways to address that, and you'll probably hear some of those experiences in our speakers today. What was interesting was the next level was people hadn't thought about it, or they didn't think they needed to, or they don't know how. And I think this is actually a very, very interesting part of the survey, because what we were expecting to hear was the timeframes aren't suitable, our needs don't match, we tried, it was a failure, it didn't work. But what we actually heard through this survey was, yes, there's a barrier, it's expensive, but overwhelmingly companies said that weren't engaging just didn't really know how to go about it. And I think that's a real plus in terms of the way forward. Also, the other thing that makes me think this is a plus is that almost 80% of companies said they would consider engaging. So again, we didn't get the, no, I don't want to, it's too hard, I've been there and done it, I'm not going to do it again. People were willing to engage in the future. And they felt that the best mechanisms for engaging would be either through direct contact with a researcher, using technical equipment, or access through some sort of support centre to help them make those connections, to help them find a way to engage. For the companies that are currently engaging, and again, this is maybe not what we were expecting, but they were overwhelmingly satisfied with the engagement. So there were a few that weren't satisfied, but most of them were satisfied with the engagement with universities. And the most common difficulty was actually that their day-to-day operations took priority, which is something I think we can understand when you're fighting for market or you're fighting for survival, that your day-to-day operations are going to take priority over your R&D with the university. Overwhelmingly, engagement's been with direct contact with a researcher, and you can see that there's a spread of contact over the 3 major universities, and we did involve the 2 other universities in Adelaide, Carnegie Mellon and Cranfield in the report as well, but there was not current activity in advanced manufacturing. When we looked at the advanced manufacturing capability, I said we had 24 subsections. We broke those down into 7 main categories. which were automation and control, precision manufacturing, computer modelling and design, human interfaces, new materials, sensing and monitoring, and management systems. And I think what's interesting about this graph is that for the companies that are engaged, there is a high level of companies who are saying they have capabilities in things like new materials, in management systems, and for companies that aren't currently engaging, they have higher needs around automation control and precision manufacturing. Perhaps some of those things that we would think of as more traditional areas of manufacturing. And when we look at the future needs, it's a very similar picture. And we can see there seems to be this feeling, which you may not get out of the graph, but certainly looking at some of the data more detailed, that the companies that are engaging with universities seem to have a richer set of capabilities, a richer knowledge of what they need for the future, and therefore there seems to be some benefit in that engagement taking place. And I'll return to those different groups at the end as well.